Today I would like to explore the fifth Parami, or perfection, in Buddhism. And in Pali, the language that the Buddha's teachings were first written down in, this fifth Parami is called Viraya. And it can also be translated into English as energy or diligence or enthusiasm or perseverance, or sometimes effort. And if you followed my talks before, you may recall that I've talked about wise effort on occasion before. So let's begin this talk about Viraya with another Jataka tale. And this one is quite long, so I've abbreviated it down and I'm just going to tell part of it. And you may remember that the Jataka tales are the stories of the Buddha before he became the Buddha, so stories of his previous lives. And in this Jataka tale, the Buddha is born as a prince, and his name is Mahajataka. And when Prince Mahajataka was 16 years old, he left home and boarded a ship to take him to a faraway land for adventure. But during the voyage, there was a great storm, and on hearing that the ship was going down, was sinking, Mahajataka decided to eat all the food he could and to change into oil-soaked clothes. And the ship sank, and everyone in it drowned except for him. And Mahajataka survived because he had the strength from the food he had eaten, and the oil-soaked clothing helped him to stay afloat. And Mahajataka swam for 7 days and nights trying to find dry land. And eventually a sea goddess saw him and decided to test him. So she asked Mahajataka, "Why have you been swimming for 7 days and nights, even when you cannot see the shore?" And he answered her, "Effort is always useful. Even without seeing the shore, I shall continue to swim until the day I reach it." But the goddess said, "Well, you know, the ocean is so vast, and no matter how much you persevere in swimming, you won't reach the shore, and you'll certainly die." And Mahajataka replied to her, "Those who keep trying cannot be criticized, because they have done what they can to the utmost, even if they may die during their attempt." And then the sea goddess went at it again, and she said, "To try without perceiving how to achieve the goal is wrought with difficulties. What's the good of effort?" And Mahajataka said to her again, "We might not be sure that what we're doing will succeed, but if we do not try, we will definitely never reach our goals. We should always put in effort, even when we might not succeed, and I shall continue trying until I reach the shore." And having heard this, the sea goddess praised Mahajataka and his effort and diligence and carried him safely to the shore. So wise effort is a virtue, even if we don't attain our goals. So to talk about Viraya in a little bit more depth now, this effort, this diligence, this perseverance is not about over-efforting or struggling. It's not about forcing ourselves to do something, because this would be almost like a form of violence towards ourselves. Excuse me. And this definitely isn't helpful. So, for example, if I exercise too strenuously, I'll probably pull a muscle or hurt myself in some way. So Viriya is not about being compulsive and overdoing things. Instead, we can think of Viriya as an attitude of gladly engaging in wholesome activities, of wanting to do things that will help us to develop on the spiritual path. You can also think of this as eagerness or an enthusiastic energy. So there's an emphasis in Viriya on willingness and cheerfulness and joy in the effort, quite the opposite of forcing ourselves or driving ourselves or coercing ourselves into doing something. So interestingly, Viriya is not just one of the paramis, not just one of the Buddhist perfections, it's also one of the 7 factors of awakening in Buddhism. And this is to emphasize its importance in spiritual awakening and developing. And in particular, the teachings tell us that Viriya is to be applied when one is experiencing laziness or sleepiness. You might recall I talked about sloth and torpor a while ago. Because Viriya has this rousing effect on the mind, an enlivening effect on the mind. So whenever you're feeling lazy or drowsy, especially in meditation, you can raise your energy level by accessing your Viriya and putting in a little effort, a little joyful effort. And some good ways of doing this are by taking a few full deep breaths, of course, maybe opening your eyes if you've had them closed in meditation, or doing some form of physical movement, such as stretching or walking or yoga. Any of these things will help to rouse your Viriya, your energy, because they raise the energy level. Another way that you can rouse your energy, increase your Viriya, if you like, is to ask yourself questions such as, what is happening in my experience right now? How is my mind responding right now? And these and similar questions, I think, can really cut through our laziness and sleepiness and return us to an alert state of mindfulness, a state in which we are aware of our experience on a moment-to-moment basis. So that's a little introduction to Viriya. And now I would like to consider the 3 elements of the Parami of Viriya in a little bit more depth. And the first component is said to be about cultivating the courage to walk the path as far as it goes and as long as it takes. So for most of us, this kind of courage of Viriya might involve 2 things. First of all, it might involve working on our bad habits, or what we can think of as our bad habits, including perhaps unwholesome thoughts or patterns of thought, unwholesome ways of talking or speaking, and unwholesome forms of action. And when I say unwholesome, what I really mean is habits or actions, things that do harm to others or to ourselves, either in the short term or the long term. Those are usually referred to as unwholesome. Second, Viriya can involve having the courage to cultivate our good habits. So it's not only about working on our bad habits, it's also about cultivating our good ones, and especially wholesome patterns of thinking, of speech, and of action. And both working on our not so good habits and trying to cultivate the positive habits that we have, both require courage. And of course, the English word courage comes from the French word for heart, cœur. And so having courage in English means coming from the heart, coming from the love that we have for others and the love that we have for ourselves and the love that we have for this spiritual journey. We have the courage because we have heart and because we want to be happy and we want others to be happy too. We can think of the courage and heroism of frontline workers who've been working with COVID patients for the last 8 months at least now. Or we can think of the persistent courage of those who speak out about racism and injustice, or the persistent courage of those who live with racism and injustice every day of their lives. There are so many examples of people with this kind of persistent courage that comes with this first quality of viriya. Or perhaps you have your own story of persistent courage, or somebody you know who's demonstrated it in their lives. This courage of viriya, this courage element of it, means being brave and facing our fears and our limitations. And we learn it, we cultivate it by doing it day by day and week by week. This isn't something we can just talk about. We develop courage by practicing courage. So that's the first feature of viriya. The second feature of viriya is really around taking responsibility for one's own spiritual development and not depending solely on the teacher or the sangha or even the practice to do it. And so this is really about taking ownership of ourselves and our response to our circumstances. And it can include, for example, working with and practicing the 3 types of wisdom that I talked about last time. And I talked about learned wisdom that's learned from books or by listening to teachers, being the first type of wisdom, learned wisdom. The second type of wisdom being reflective wisdom that we acquire from thinking and reasoning when we think about what's been said or what we've read in a book and reflect on whether that's true for us in our lives. That's reflective wisdom. And then thirdly, there's wisdom acquired from what I might call direct insight. When you've had a direct experience of something that you've read about or thought about, and you just know, that kind of instinctive knowing, the aha moment, I might call it, which is the wisdom that comes with spiritual development. So in this aspect of viriya, where we are taking responsibility for ourselves and for our own spiritual journey, it's really about moving beyond our dependence on a teacher or on a support group or even on the Buddha, and taking ownership of our lives and what we do with them. You know, suffering is inevitable in life, but we can always choose how to respond to it. That's what I'm talking about here, is taking responsibility for how we respond to life circumstances. You know, we all get sick, we will all grow old, and we'll all die eventually. These things are inevitable. But we can take ownership for how we relate to these basic truths, how we hold them. Do we struggle against them or try to avoid them? Or do we say, yes, this is tough, but I'm responsible for my attitude to life. I can choose how I want to respond. And as Viktor Frankl said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So this is what I'm talking about now here. It's choosing to be responsible for ourselves and for our lives and for our own spiritual development. So the third element of effort, or viriya, is said to be benefiting others and wanting to benefit others, especially in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. This is really about awakening our hearts so that we can be of service to others on the spiritual path. And it's definitely related to both the courage that I spoke about a few minutes ago and to the second element of viriya that I mentioned in terms of being responsible for ourselves. So this third element is sometimes called bodhicitta, the awakened heart. And when it fuels our willingness to practice, we have bodhicitta. When we have bodhicitta, we want to help others. So it's the kind of effort that comes from wanting to help others. And this really helps us to let go of our self-centered cravings and aversions and desires, and to put others first, to really work on the behalf of others. So deepening our concern for others, and therefore deepening our viriya, is a sure antidote to apathy and laziness. So these are the three elements of effort, or viriya, this fifth parami. And they are courage, taking responsibility for oneself and one's own spiritual journey, and trying to be of benefit to others as they go on their spiritual journeys. And I'd like to close by just going back to this idea of the awakened heart, bodhicitta, as the deep intention to awaken to life in order to help others to do the same thing. And perhaps nobody put this better than Shantideva. Shantideva was an 8th century monk who wrote a very well-known book called The Way of the Bodhisattva, those who aspire to awaken and to be of benefit to others. This is what Shantideva says, and I think it's a really wonderful description of this parami of viriya. He says, "For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world." Now that's viriya. Thank you so much for your attention.